Hello and welcome to this segment on CTN, which is CIO Talk Network. To learn more, please visit CIO.com. And today's topic is addressing the Big Data Veracity Challenge. And our guests for today's show are Philip Wisoff, who is the Chief Information Officer with Proskauer. Good morning, Phil. How are you?
Morning. Fine, thank you.
Very good. And just before we got started, learned Phil is from New York, so hope things are going well.
Yes, we're recovering. Thank you.
Good. And hope everything will settle down in coming days and you can resume your normal life along with your other peers and counterparts and workers in the company. So best wishes there.
Thank you very much.
And we also have Ram Akella, who is the Professor of Information Systems and Technology Management. He's also the Director of Center for Knowledge Information Systems and Management of Technology with the University of California, Santa Cruz. Good morning, Ram. How are you?
Good morning. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. So how is life at your end?
Wonderful. I'm at Laguna Beach. I'm enjoying the ocean and the waves before a board meeting and delighted to be working and chatting with you right now with a nice audience.
So now, Phil, can you see how people can tease us with being at such a beautiful and gorgeous location while talking to us about technology?
I'm going to recommend that my firm open an office there. Sounds great.
All right, guys. So the topic that we have picked up, in fact, just to set the premise, we have done other shows on big data, and the world is talking about big data in general, and people are betting their paycheck on what they can get out of it. Now, the question here is that whatever is the end result that we are seeking, that is kind of making a lot of assumptions that you'll get the right clean data, you will have the best processing and timely processing, and then you'll have the best possible interpretation. There's so many variables. So when we were to start with this conversation, Phil, I'll start with you. Do you think, can we really bet on an algorithm which basically will pull out some results and then we will try having the whole business and or enterprise work accordingly? Is it really reasonable to go with that mindset?
I think the answer, ultimately is yes. I'm more concerned about are you asking the right questions, though, of the algorithm to get the business solutions that you're looking for. So I'm very concerned that the software seems to be somewhat in its early stages. I don't want to say infancy, but probably in its teenage stages in terms of the analytics. But I suspect that's going to get stronger. What really is, to me, is the important part is asking the right questions.
So, Ram, in your world, when you are looking at big data, you've dealt with huge amounts of data and you also research and see other organizations playing with it. Where do you think this is today? Is it fully cooked? Is it like we got our act together and the results that we are getting are truly showing us the signs that, yes, this can be something we can bet our paychecks on?
Well, I think the area is wonderful shape, but it's got a long ways to go yet. I think algorithms are getting extremely powerful, but I think there are 2 or 3 caveats and additional work to be done. First of all, I think as Phil pointed out, what is the right question to ask is important because people think, hey, big data. But if you don't know what question to ask, what answers you get, right? So that's one. But even when you have the right question, if you have data, you have a lot of noisy data. And noisy data can come from 2 sources. One is that somehow what is being put in is not right. We'll come back to that a bit later. But you also have lots of data, a lot of which may or may not be pertinent. So how do you sift through all that with a combination of algorithms and humans? That's a big question that's being resolved right now. And later in the conversation, I'll give you examples of how we did this at Cisco, when we can take 100 pages of text and reduce it to 1 page of refined, very useful and pertinent text, and so on. So I think it's very important to process correctly, to ask the right questions, and to use humans the most effectively to win out what's not just right, but what's pertinent to get what you need.
Now, with that said, isn't that what you always try to look for, Phil, in your world, in the legal industry? Because you definitely could, if you wanted, you could be flooded with all types of data. And now with electronic medium, you can have structured and unstructured data. So I'm sure this is relevant for you, but do you think if somebody comes up with that earth-shattering algorithm or discovery, no pun intended with the e-discovery process that typically goes on within the law firms, do you think you would still say, okay, I'm going to minimize the human intervention or human interpretation and start looking more and more to an algorithm, and I do not see there's going to be any false positives?
Law is a very interesting industry, and I think you'll have, just culturally with us, I think it's going to be a long time before there's absolutely no human intervention. We may rely fairly heavily, we already do, particularly with respect to e-discovery, on algorithms to sort through massive amounts of information to find the gems, if you would. But even after that's done, somebody has to look at it. So I don't think, at least in that area, that we will not have any human intervention and just be totally reliant on algorithms. That's our industry. Maybe in other areas that might be true.
Now, Ram, when we look at the very big data concept, and we are talking about veracity, which is trust. So are we trying to say that we are trusting that it can handle that volume of data, or it can come up with appropriate output, and then, or for that matter, it can help interpret what exactly is what you want to, which is what we can call as an actionable insight or an action that you can take based on all that crunching? What are we truly betting on? Is it all of the above or one thing in particular?
I think it's all the above. So in other words, I would say if I expect an algorithm to do something for me in the field, I'd first ask, is there a way of figuring out whether the data I'm getting is really true or not? And part of it is self-consistency, right? Are there self-contradictory parts of the data? But if I have a consistent error, then perhaps only a human can see it. So that's the veracity part. The other part is, if I'm looking for insights, which is what I really care about, then in terms of insights, I think you certainly want the human to sort of hear the sort of thing I'm looking for. But the algorithm can also say, hey, in all this data, here are some patterns I'm seeing, and which of these might be potentially useful for you? Can you let me know? And by the way, the algorithm can also say, look, this part I'm pretty confident about. It looks reasonable to make these sort of statements, but these statements are not quite sure. And by the way, I need some inputs from you or some additional data to be pretty clear. So I think these are all the sorts of things the algorithm can be doing in conjunction with the human, expecting some human input as well.
Now, Phil, if you were to take a Lamborghini, which can run 0 to 100 miles an hour in 3 seconds, you would want to still, and that is presented to you, of course, it could be a great toy to have, but then would you look under the hood to see, is it safe? Does it really, can that do it consistently? And then will it really give me all that I want besides just speed? So trying to draw a parallel, that big data is being offered to you and it is like a black box. Would you like to see under the hood, or would you just rely on what's being presented?
It depends. I guess the analogy, if I was to carry it a little further, is I'm presented with if I was presented with a Lamborghini in 1910, when autos were just coming out, I may look under the hood. But now in 12, the Lamborghini has a reputation. It's well understood. I don't need to look under the hood to do that. I just don't think we're there with big data. And I think Ram is basically saying the same thing. So just give me a black box and saying trust it is not going to happen now. Maybe 5 years from now, maybe is what will happen. But we're not there yet.
So would you say, Phil, that the fact that you're not ready or you would like to look under the hood, does that tell you and others that we should perhaps wait a little bit, or you should still start using it, but with a healthy skepticism?
I think it's the latter. I think there's some real opportunities. Again, I know the law states better than others. I think there's some real opportunities out there to take advantage of this. I mean, this is a powerful tool, and the mashup of if you would, of kind of structured and unstructured data to glean some business back that can be useful to running the firm or gaining advantage are great. You can't ignore it.
So, Ram, do you think there is a calibration we can do in terms of how much trust, or to what degree can we trust the results or the output or the interpretation?
Yes, but that's both deep and domain dependent. Earlier on, I was alluding to the work of the many companies we are working with. One is a prototype at Cisco, which does diagnostics. When people come up with problems with whatever they bought from Cisco and say, hey, is this functioning or not? Can you tell us what's going on here? We have a problem. How do you know what the problem is, what's the cause, and how do you fix it? So actually, our system actually does this mainly automatically or semi-automatically with minimal human inputs from the very smart Cisco engineers. So way of validating or verifying how well you're doing is the solutions that the system comes up with. Are there new solutions that the engineer could not think of by himself or herself? And of the solutions which came up were some missed out that the engineer is providing. So we've done those sort of tests. And transpires there are things that the engineer could not have really thought about in the time available or correctly, or because the engineer did not know these particular sort of problems. Because in our algorithms, we are fusing knowledge from many engineers put together. At the same time, there are certain problems that only the engineer could really handle, and their algorithm did not bring up.
Now, Phil, think about a situation. There are two types of leaders, right? It could be a bean counter or the investor. So if it's a bean counter, they would look for efficiency. And the Cisco example that Ram just gave, it's essentially allowing us to reduce the people in support, maybe utilize the details to suggest a solution, but you would not break your bank if that solution does not work. So you're basically reducing the links in that process for a person to get to that end goal. And if it doesn't work, then we just say, okay, let's try something else. That's a different type of a situation where big data could show promise, and it's a safer bet perhaps. But how about when people say, I'm going to change the way I keep my inventory on a retail shelf based on what big data suggests. And that reduces the sales. It creates as maybe goodwill loss or whatever other major damage. Do you think we should be looking at such applications yet?
I think I'll go back to what Ram said. I think there's different classes of applications. I think for the Cisco example, it was a great example where by looking at the data, rather than using human intuition to say, how did this problem get solved in the past, we have enough data facts to drive an answer to what the problem is. And if we can replicate that, then yes, we can do that. There are the other class of problems, though, are the ones that we're taking, in my sense, we're not doing something new, but we're taking what might have been traditionally been a human activity and replacing it totally with the data, driving the work based on the data. I think that's going to be take longer to do.
Let's take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back. And Ram, when we come back, we would like to compare this big data to business intelligence. We always looked at the data source, and if it was not as clean, then we would outright reject. But in this case, we are saying, bring it on. Any type of data that you have, we have got this magic pill and or a factory which will just take everything that you have, inhale, and give you those golden nuggets. Isn't this an apple pie? Let's explore this when we come back. Please stay tuned.
Today, enterprise technology is both strategic and global. Each week on CTN CIO Talk Network, IT thought leaders from around the world share their experience with listeners as they discuss with Sanjog Aul how they are trimming costs and partnering with business to innovate and help IT become more competitive, better care for customers, and improve the corporate bottom line. If you want to keep up with IT thought leadership, listen to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul at CIOTalkNetwork.com. You are listening to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul. To learn more about our program, please visit CIOTalkNetwork.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. So, Ram, since you have been dealing with data and its related applications, I'm sure business intelligence is something that is not truly nostalgia. It still exists, but then that's how we always look at it. And where we would like to see clean data, we would look at the data integrity, security, and the very cleanliness of that data. And then we would try to say, because I have that clean data, we will do certain things on it. And that's what is going to get us reliable results. But here, we are somehow expecting that no matter what validation may or may not have been performed on the source data, we are going to get good results. Is this really a good approach to how we wanted to basically plan our business or try to rely on anything and everything just like that, just because it's something new. It is a fad factor connected to it.
I think you bring up a great point. And I think big data is as vulnerable to all sorts of problems as the old BI, especially since we're trying to do far more than traditional BI, because we're trying to be much more proactive, much more real time, and much more in the action compared to BI. So the point though is, if you think of big data, I would say big data analytics, with the emphasis being analytics, is important, because part of the analytics that we use is to really look at data coming in, because with big data, you have several new problems that you didn't have as much of with business intelligence, BI. One of which is sparsity. We always talk of big data, right? But just now you spoke of predicting sales and so on. So similarly, whether you predict sales or you look at advertising, you have lots of big data, but you also have a lot of data sparsity. We have a lot of data about how many ads are being seen by users, but very few users actually buy things. So there's a sparsity on the action. So unless you clean out the data, which is noisy, and also account and adjust for sparsity, your results may be pretty poor. So there's a whole component. There are actually 4 building blocks of doing big data analytics, and one of which is something we call extractive analytics. And extractive analytics says, given a ton of big data, how do you extract what is meaningful before further processing to get insights and action? And so part of that is accounting for clean data or taking dirty or noisy data and extracting the most useful data out of all of it. And that's a huge area of work underway right now. And we're still midway through the process. So that's a very important distinction I think you need to bear in mind.
So Phil, in your world, when we look at how the different pieces of the puzzle in a law firm work, and you are custodian of information overall, what is it that the business is looking for, or the attorneys or other people looking for, which would prompt you to say, now this is a compelling case for us to introduce big data, and we can reliably deliver some results so that we can show ROI on that investment, plus, of course, help the company grow forward?
Okay, well, there are two areas, at least in the law business, where law firms are probably going to be looking to big data or already are doing that. And the first example is, for the past 50 plus years, attorneys have billed on by the hour. Because of what happened in the economy in 2008, 2009, plus client demand, plus competition, there's a lot of price competition out there. And lawyers traditionally have not, and because it's been billed by the hour, efficiency was not a chief concern of the lawyers. And now it's becoming that. We have tons of data that we're generating every day about the hours that our lawyers work and what they're doing. What we need to do is really pick through that data and understand how to price a particular type of law work, whether it's a litigation, contract, or some other type of law work. And we believe we can do that. And we're generating all this data to do that. Traditional BI wouldn't be able to do that for us. The second example is actually a marriage of business intelligence with big data, and that is we want to identify opportunities with existing clients, because that's where it's easier to tell existing clients and then capture a new one. There's lots of information available externally, lawsuits that are set up, various other activities. So we can marry that and understand where a client may be a certain legal obstacle, or anticipate that and get to the client and say, we can help you with this. I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for law firms.
Now, where all do you think you are willing to invest today if the environment was right or the funding was available, and where all would you be on the fence?
So I think the first example I gave, we're actually willing to invest in that now. And I think it's just a question of capturing the data. The second example, I think, is a little bit more, this is where you get back to the conversation about algorithms and whether you trust them or not. Did the analytics engine spit out a true opportunity with a client? And I think that's where we're going to have human intervention. So I think that one's a little bit further down the road.
Ram, if you were to look under the hood across the whole chain, when the data is received, the data is sifted through, the data is processed and or crunched, then the output is interpreted before giving the final insight. This whole area, where all are there gotchas and where all are people using their own respective different flavors, which is making it confusing to see which one is better than the other.
So let's just go through it step by step, right? So I think the data collection is one of the most problematic areas right now. And I think often when people collect data, they don't know, going back to Phil's original remark, they don't quite know what the question they're asking is in some areas. So I think identifying what am I trying to answer, it would be the first point, and then collecting the right data. That's one of the biggest gotchas right now. The second part of it is people don't often, so in fact, if you think of litigation and so on, and there are several companies working on this, and IBM has, $1 billion of revenue from this. So that's, litigation is also a good example of this. Now, the second part of it is, once I get that, how much of human intervention do I need to train the algorithms is a big question. So we often find when algorithms and humans have to work together, a lot of people don't have a clear idea of how much of human inputs are required and what level of expertise and for how long. So that's a second gotcha if you're not careful, because people expect this algorithm to be black magic or white magic out of box, and that's not true. You need to train it. Then the third thing is algorithms often have doings when they're valid and when they're not. So if you don't realize that, for example, maybe an algorithm can only handle up to 1 million customers, and maybe we have 10 million customers or 100 million customers. So it just comes to a grinding halt. So understanding the scale of an algorithm or when it can work under what conditions, the data is extremely noisy, some algorithms can't work. So I think understanding each of these can be a very important to avoid gotcha situations, I think. And often people will use algorithms that they don't quite know what algorithm is relevant. So they just throw algorithms, and that's not a very correct thing to do. And I think we're still in the process of creating a new generation of data scientists who can figure out what to use when.
Now, with all that you said, the first point where you mentioned that we should be careful in collecting data and have the right answers, we should know which answers are to be provided and thus collect data. But that doesn't seem to be the approach when we are handling the big data concept. They're saying, I'm going to pick up every tweet, every social media post, everything that a customer says, and then without them knowing truly or without soliciting that, we're going to take all of that and somehow try to read between the lines and come up with that magic insight, which is going to get us closer to our customer and maybe become even more proactive. Before they know what they want, we will know what they want. Is that truly possible? I mean, are we really looking at a crystal ball?
Actually, I think we are halfway there in my view, that it is indeed true that when you have many sources of information, right, what happens is if you want to understand what a customer or a user wants, right, there's what's called explicit feedback, where you process a lot of data and you actually provide some insights or action to a user and then ask, are you happy or not? And this can be explicit. That's called explicit feedback. The other possibility is you keep on providing the user either with some results or, for example, ads, and you see whether the user reacts favorably or not, very positively and enthusiastically or not. So in that case, the user does not have to say, I like it, I don't like it. You can just see from the behavior whether the user is happy and enthusiastic, and you use that as feedback, and you keep tuning what you keep further providing the user. So with that, actually, we can make tremendous headway. And what we can do is when you look at the tweets, the Facebook inputs, all these different types of inputs, you can process all that and provide what's relevant to the user. But this is an area of active research right now, and the jury is out yet. Because if you see Facebook, the stock, not quite tight, took a big hit because they couldn't supply the pertinent ads because they have a lot of data, but it could be a weak signal, or they may not be using the signal very effectively to figure out what the user wants. So I think this is midway. Some people are being extremely successful, as people are a little scared when they get results from Google, and others have not been so successful. So it's we are right in the plumb in the middle of being very successful, but not quite there yet.
Phil, in your world, do you think you can read between the lines and even see the emotions involved with an individual who's posting something which you would like to otherwise use in your in your discovery process or whatever else that you would use that for, do you think you can truly go to that level in utilizing that big data inference in creating an evidence which could then be admissible and then also is working in your favor?
I think it's a starting. I think all it is a starting point. I think as I read through the literature, predicting human behavior is big data is not great at predicting human behavior. I mean, that's up to a certain point. It can give you an inference, but after that, you've got to investigate that and see if it's really true. So I don't think we're going to be able to say, oh, such and such in such a litigation, this person is going to say these things or react this way to this question. I just don't think we're going to get that from big data.
All right, let's take a quick break, listeners. When we come back, let's look at the very integrity, sanctity, security of the source data, which is being generated dynamically in real time. So yes, if we were to do this in a batch mode or in an offline mode, if you will, then yes, we can take those careful surveys and then try to get that data inserted. What is it that we could truly do realistically to make sure that all that we are using as a source has its integrity, and because all of that is going to also be utilized to validate what the final results are? Please stay tuned. When we are back, we will explore this part.
Today, enterprise technology is both strategic and global. Each week on CTN CIO Talk Network, IT thought leaders from around the world share their experience with listeners as they discuss with Sanjog Aul how they are trimming costs and partnering with business to innovate and help IT become more competitive, better care for customers, and improve the corporate bottom line. If you want to keep up with IT thought leadership, listen to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul at CIOTalkNetwork.com. You are listening to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul. To learn more about our program, please visit CIOTalkNetwork.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. So, Phil, I'd like to ask you a question with respect to e-discovery. That's a process that is utilized by organizations. They are at all times looking for security and integrity of data, because it's very possible that the output that you come up with, the evidence that could be rendered inadmissible in the court of law if somebody challenges or the judge says, no, this has got some tampering that has happened. So what is it that in your world, if at all you were to use this big data related analytics and or whatever else that you do in your processes, what would you differently to ensure that you are maintaining the integrity, the security, the sanctity of the very source data that was collected? Is it your responsibility, or you just hope that general counsel and the CIO of the client's organization is supposed to do that? Because anyway, it's coming to you.
Well, in our business, there's something called the chain of custody, which says the data, we have to actually track the data from its source to when it gets on our systems, and that process would remain the same. I mean, that's just a requirement of the legal industry. In a broader context, I think when you're looking at sanctity of data, what I have control over is data that's generated within my organization, and there's obviously a lot of that. But the real issue for me is if I'm going to do some of the other things I talked about, when I start pulling data from the outside, how reliable is that data? And then once I have it in, how secure is that data? So those are the issues from my perspective.
So would you be willing to hold the bag if something happened at the source, which is with their client, and while there was a chain of custody, could you truly trace it back that I was not at fault, somebody else was, and whosoever was at fault, they're the ones who are supposed to fix it and or provide you an alternate?
Well, that's the source for a lot of litigation, actually. But in all seriousness, the chain of custody comes at this point when we're delivered the data, whether it's electronically or they physically send us CDs or whatever it is. We log that moment when we have it. And from that point on, we have a record of where it is. So that's just coming into my organization. And that is considered the chain of custody. Now, if it's been tampered with at the originating source, that's beyond our control.
Now, Ram, what do you think can be done in situations where you do not have a lot of the same, which is same input in terms of user data is not provided? There's not a lot, very big population, so you cannot build actually a pattern. Then do you think big data is even useful?
It is. You bring up a very good point that if you talk in advertise, typically these days, big data is being driven interestingly by advertising, computational advertising, because you have millions and hundreds of millions and billions of people who respond, and energy analytics. These are some of the areas. So in all these cases, you have very many millions of users, and you can actually aggregate across all of them to come up with a solution. So the individual is only representing the overall population. If you think of situations when you have an individual, you can do a good job, but it's certainly much noisier and has more error likely. By tracking the individual path of a user and looking at the evolution, then you can do a pretty good job, but you still, because you're at the individual level, you could have a lot more error.
So does that really solve somebody's problem? What could be the use cases, or what type of businesses could truly then not use big data because of this very shortcoming?
Well, it's interesting. So if you think of, and I would frame it as not being able to use big data in an easy way, but needing much more hard work. I think Phil's example of legal is a very good example. If you want to have individual, think of it, if you have an automated home, and you walk into the house and you want the temperature in the right setting, the lighting in the right setting, all these things, I think some components of that you can use big data to see who are other similar users. But the rest of it, you have very idiosyncratic behavior, is something which will need a lot of hard work. Anything, for example, any creative activity of creating a new product, when there's something which you cannot quite predict, is much harder. I mean, you can enable, but if every individual has a different style of doing things, something creative, it's much harder to use big data.
No, we always look at the human side of any technology implementation. In this case, more than anything else, we are still relying on the final interpretation of the output that is created through that big data churning machine. And those are the people who could interpret it differently. So I give the same data set to 20 people, maybe with similar or say a different background and or experience level. They may come up with more, less, or different insights. So Phil, do you think if that is what it is, then what are we getting out of this? And in your space, so if I had 20 different attorneys looking at the same case with some data presented to them, if they are to come up with different interpretations or different case models, is that really leaving technology redundant almost?
Well, I think the potential, and we haven't gotten there yet, particularly with what you're talking about, is for the analytics to make us more efficient with respect to reviewing the information. And we're already starting to do some of that in terms of when we get a discovery case in, we could get terabytes of data, millions of emails, millions of documents, videos, audio clips. We need some way to manage all that information and again, get down to the pertinent pieces. And that's really the starting point. Once we've said, okay, out of this huge set of data, we have 1,000 items we should look at rather than millions of items to look at. That's where we're getting the efficiencies.
Now, do you think, Ram, is the people side the weakest link in making big data successful? Because at the end of the day, these are the people, number one, you would not know suddenly how many people of reliable skill levels are available to do something like this. And then you don't have a benchmark today for you to say this person is really delivering good insights versus not as good insights. Do we need to fail a little more for us to figure out who is good versus who's not?
That's a great question. I love your question because this term crowdsourcing is now increasingly being used in connection with the big data analytics. So in other words, when you have lots of people who are actually providing inputs to enable algorithms or to train algorithms, how do you make it work? So far, most people, the assumptions means these people are all interchangeable, which is not the truth at all. And they actually come in varying degrees of either levels of expertise in the same area or expertise in different aspects of assets. And so I think the right choice of these people, depending on the accuracy level you need. So let's say you might want better and better accuracy in terms of insights, right? Well, it depends on what's my economic value. So if I'm going to get a lot of economic value by processing the data and coming to insights on along a certain dimension, then you certainly want to have smarter people with more experience who are helping me, whom I may want to pay more. Whereas if something is not as valuable, then I may not want to kill myself either on the algorithm front or the person front. So that is very much underway right now.
So Phil, coming to you, so you actually mentioned in your previous comment that this could be utilized to make you efficient. How about being effective? Do you think this particular whole process or technology or this combination of people, process, and technology has the potential to make an organization effective versus just efficient?
Absolutely. I would go back to the earlier examples of where we're really looking for big data to help us either doing a much better or more effective job of pricing our work and identifying opportunities and helping our clients. So I think, yes, the answer is definitely yes. So it's not just an efficiency thing.
All right. So then in your world, when you're trying to make people effective, if at all you try to do that, what all is left to be desired from big data? What would you see where people say, yes, this is something which is not helping me save a buck? It is going beyond that.
I think this goes back to, can you predict what individuals are going to do? I just don't think that's where if this is going to be viewed as having much value. I think if it helps us run the business better and more effectively, present the efficiencies, that's where I think the value, that's where the value is in terms of my perspective.
Yes. Hi, Ram. Yeah, we're finishing up with Phil and definitely we'll be having you continue your answer. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
I finished.
Yeah, okay, good. Now, yes, so please share your views. I think we lost you when you were about to share a particular angle to the answer that you were about to provide.
Okay. I was just saying that I don't know whether you heard the comment I made about crowdsourcing of humans.
Yes, You just started with that.
So the thing is, you have humans with different levels of expertise and they cost different amounts of money, and they're very helpful in actually training and guiding algorithms. So, but it then depends on what is the value. If I get a better answer, am I going to make much more money or benefit much more? And then it's worth having an expert. So I think characterizing experts either by the depth of their expertise or the different facet of their expertise makes a huge difference in training these algorithms. So the human becomes very important. And I think evaluating what they can do to enhance the answer makes a big difference. This also relates, by the way, Sanjog, to a question you asked Phil earlier, because humans are very good disambiguating when there is something that's not very clear and where the algorithm doesn't quite know what to do. Also, I think when you predict, you base it on data, but not only is there the current data, but a human may actually have additional expertise based on a lot of data exposure in other contexts. And that is what the human is bringing in compared to the algorithm. And that's why the human is so important.
All right, great. Now let's take a quick break. When we come back, Phil, I'd like to ask you about the influence management that an IT leader might have to demonstrate. Because if you were to implement big data, yes, miracles are being expected, or maybe some output is expected, but then the people who are creating data or are responsible or being custodians of data, and then the ones who are churning the results, and then the people who are interpreting, there are 2 or 3 different camps. And all of them have to coordinate, they have to work together and then go back round in circles a couple of times, or iterations are to be done before a final good result can be produced and used. You may be at the top and trying to manage it all. What would it take for you to do that? Please stay tuned. We'll be right back and explore.
Today, enterprise technology is both strategic and global. Each week on CTN CIO Talk Network, IT thought leaders from around the world share their experience with listeners as they discuss with Sanjog Aul how they are trimming costs and partnering with business to innovate and help IT become more competitive, better care for customers, and improve the corporate bottom line. If you want to keep up with IT thought leadership, listen to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul at CIOTalkNetwork.com. You are listening to CTN CIO Talk Network with Sanjog Aul. To learn more about our program, please visit CIOTalkNetwork.com. Now, back to the show.
So we're talking about influence management. So Phil, if big data is such a process which is touching business, is touching operations, it's touching IT, and you might be seen as someone who is running because of being an IT leader, and you can at most influence some of the entities and or people. How do you expect to pull this off and do it on an ongoing basis successfully?
I think it's my, as a CIO, I think it's my responsibility to present the optimal to the appropriate management people. I think big data to me, in terms of the organization, is really a mashup of the business development group, the finance group, and IT working together, because I think the kinds of business problems we're trying to solve is going to take the expertise from all those groups. Frankly, and I'm not sure where this ends up, I think over time we're going to see, if the promise of big data evolves the way I think it's going to, I think you're going to see almost a separate entity spring up in most organizations that deal with this, because it's not just an IT discipline.
So, Ram, in your case, when you do see organizations successfully or not as successfully delivering on the big data initiatives, where all, from a leadership and management and oversight and governance standpoint, things fail?
I think, first of all, just task assignment. I think identifying the person who drives the initiative. I think people often get confused between the infrastructure, things like Hadoop, with the analytic capability.
Yeah.
So I think choice of the leader actually and the person who actually understands the totality is one place where things often tend to fall apart. But governance issue, I've always found organizations, if I have a CIO, who could potentially become a COO and a CEO, that is, that business people, not just technologists, makes a big difference. Whereas if they report into the CFO, and people view this as more like a cost center or something to be managed, then also things may or may not work.
All right. So, Phil, in your world, do you have any message for the community out there which is trying to get miracles out of this process? I do not see big data as a technology alone, because we are looking at a complete phenomena. So what is your message to those people?
Well, I think there's some excellent literature out there. If somebody's trying to learn about this, I think there's some excellent literature out on the net that you can pick up. There's one article in particular kind of gives you a good overview on how organizations might take advantage of this. There's a Harvard Business Review article that came out recently, I think in October. That's kind of fairly easy to read and kind of sums it up for on the business side. I think that the other thing is you just need to get yourself educated about what it is, and then think about the possibilities with respect to your company or organization. There's just, and finally, there's literally thousands of use cases out there that have been documented or discussed, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So there's lots of information out there for you to get educated about.
Anything which you would like to caution people who are trying to take this on so that they don't burn themselves or they don't get overzealous?
Well, I would talk about the hype cycle, like with any new technology or thing that's very popular. It's not going to be the answer to all questions.
All right. Now, one final question for you. So as you see organizations out there trying this, where do you see the future going, and how far are we from actually establishing the big data veracity?
This for me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's tremendous potential. I should actually say there's so much potential as described in the McKinsey report and also in the HBR article by Eric that Phil was referring to, that I think people are hiring data scientists in huge volumes, and we're actually starting new programs, both at the University of California, both at Santa Cruz and Berkeley in this area. And the emphasis there is really asking the right question. And in terms of the veracity part, really establishing processes and procedures so that given questions, what is the data you require and what sort of testing might you do, both data analytically and in an organizational sense, to make certain that the data is useful and productive is something that is underway right now.
On behalf of the show and our listeners, I'd like to thank you, Phil and Ram, for sharing your thoughts about addressing the big data veracity challenge.
A pleasure. Thank you.
A real pleasure, Sanjog and Phil.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And listeners, please like us on Facebook, search for CIO Talk Network, and be sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you again for listening to this segment on CIO Talk Network. This is Sanjog Aul, your talk show host. Till next week, take care and God bless.